northeastern Poland, which after the war became Belarus. When I was born, it was still Poland. Poland was invaded in 1939 by the Russians. Western Poland was invaded by the Germans. So the first school that I went to was a Russian school. I became 6 years old in 1939. This was the beginning of the German occupation, and it was the beginning of the planning of the Holocaust. One of my earliest memories at that time was a German officer in a different setting. German officer came in a car with a couple of other soldiers, and he started handing out candy. So all the children in town, I would say in our little shtetl, the Jews were probably 30–40% of the population. So everyone lined up, Jews and non-Jews, and he was handing out the candy, and I was in line way back, when suddenly a boy ahead of me, 3 or 4 people ahead of me, who was black curly hair, looked obviously Jewish, he didn't look like the Poles, and the German screamed out, "Jude, Jew!" And he said, "No candy for you," or something to that effect. As soon as I heard that, I became very frightened. I immediately ran away. I didn't want the candy. I just wanted to get out there in one piece. The Germans, the first thing that they did is they let out the prisons. They emptied the prisons. And what did they do? They gave them rifles. They created a militia, a local militia. Now, please understand, here we have the dregs of society, murderers, killers, rapists, God knows what they were. Suddenly they became the law. And they became the commanders over the Jews. Eventually, the Germans created a ghetto, and a ghetto was a way to concentrate as many Jews as they could into one place, because there were many Jews who were farmers. So they would gather several shtetls, a whole bunch of farms, and concentrate them in a larger area. And this was the case with us. We were some of the latecomers to the ghetto, so there was no room in the ghetto. So the only place that they found for us was a tiny little bathhouse that was at the edge of the ghetto. It was very, very close to the fence that the Germans built to keep the Jews in place in the ghetto. It turned out that that particular lucky break, it turned out to be a lucky break, was what may have saved our lives. Because when the ghetto was about to be liquidated, they usually did that very, very, very early in the morning. And as some of the people had heard, or they heard some kind of noise, so they started running toward the fence, collapsed the fence. And I remember my mother woke up. She was the first one to wake up, and so she started screaming for us to get out because people started running out of the ghetto. The people running from the ghetto, they turned right. Why? Because turning left was very dangerous, since there was a major highway leading into town, which passed right by the ghetto. My father at that time, Allah Shalom, decided that since everybody was running to the right, it would be probably worth a chance, even though we might get killed crossing the road, since there may have been German units going up and down the road. But it was worth to do that because the Germans and the Nazis helping them would be concentrating on the crowd, since 99.9% of them are running to the right, that we might be able to sneak through and across the road, and there were some bushes there, and that's what happened. And that's how we were able to get out of the ghetto alive. After the ghetto, we were in a situation where we were essentially in hiding. Hiding entailed, first of all, knowledge of the geography. It also entailed knowing some people who could be approached without turning us into the Germans. The price for turning in a Jew was 2 kilograms of salt. Salt during the war was a very rarely available item, and since it's used in preservation of meats there, so it was very, very important to get salt. So the price of a Jew was 2 kilograms of salt. So the idea is approaching somebody that one did not know. He could have turned us in very quickly, he or she. So my father was in business buying up flax from farmers. Flax is like a cotton in the northern areas. So he knew these peasants. My father had a very good name as an honest, decent businessman who would never cheat any of these people, because remember, these people were basically illiterate. Weights and measures was not something that they were very familiar with. So we would go and knock. My father would knock on the window. The windows in Belarus are very small in order to preserve heat in the very, very rough winters. So knock on the windows, and the man would get out of bed or wherever he was resting, and he would recognize my father right away. So they would either try to put us up for a few days in a barn, or if they couldn't, they would say, look, there are Germans about a kilometer away. He would give us some milk and some bread, and he would say, look, you can't stay here, but I'll tell. So my father said, well, where can we go? I got a child here. And the man would say, I'll tell you what, why don't you go about 5 kilometers from here is my brother-in-law. He's right near the woods. It's a very quiet farm. Go there, tell him I sent you. That type of thing. In the summer, we were able to hide out in the woods because there were partisans there. Partisans were fighting against the Nazis, and they were sort of, we used them as a protector, as a cordon sanitaire behind which we can hide. This went on for about 2 3/4 years. We were eventually liberated by the Russian army in the fall of 1944. Fall of 1944, and we, by the time we came back to Nowy Pohost, which was a little shtetl where I was born at, of the 30 to 40% of the population that was Jewish, very, very few remained. You could count them on the fingers of maybe 2 hands, maybe not that many. So at this time, it was 1945, and we moved moved to Poland, to the big city of Lodz, which is western Poland. And in Lodz, there were already Haganah agents. The very first thing that we had to do is destroy all documents, all photographs. Why? Because they created new documents for us saying that we were Greeks who were liberated from German concentration camps. Now this part of the story was really full of theatrics. We did not speak Greek. No one could speak Greek. So we were told that when usually Russian officers or soldiers would ask us something which we knew what they were talking about, we could never answer them in Russian. We had to answer them in a new Greek. And the new Greek were passages from the Jewish Hebrew prayers. One favorite one to people who were knowledgeable was Yikum Purkan, which is not even Hebrew, it's Aramaic. So a Russian would say, Kto vi? Who are you? And you would say, Yikum Purkan min Shmaya. Now, some people were not familiar with Yikum Purkan because they were not very religious or whatever, so they were told that they could recite the Kaddish. So some Russian would say again, Kak tvoye imya, what is your name? And the man said, Yitkadal v'yitkadash v'yirabah. So the Russian would say, well, they're obviously Greeks, they seem to speak Greek, and they would leave us alone. Now we had to cross from Poland in order to get to our home Greece, which was obviously a lie. We had to cross the border into Czechoslovakia from Poland. From Czechoslovakia, we crossed the border into Austria. And from Austria, instead of heading anywhere near Greece, we wound up in Italy. Eventually, we were able to get passage to the United States. And this was a very long, painful wait. We wound up being in Italy for 5 years. And finally reached the United States in very beginning of 1950. In the United States, I was able to finish high school, and I enrolled myself at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Did not know what to major in, so I took several different courses: economics, chemistry, English, and some other course that I don't recall. I graduated from George Washington University Pharmacy School in 1955 at age 22. And I got married the same year. Thank God my 3 sons were born in 1956, 58, and 64. Unfortunately, after my youngest son was born, 6 months later, my wife died. That created a very, very difficult part in my life, raising my 3 young children alone. But thank God they grew up, they became educated. My oldest son became a pharmacist. My middle son became a physician. He became a gastroenterologist. And my youngest son joined the New York Police Department, where he eventually obtained a master's degree from Harvard University and became a commander of the executive training program of the New York Police Department at the rank of a captain. I have, thank God, 9 grandchildren, of whom most have finished college now. I have 3 married grandchildren, who between them, thank God, have 9 great-grandchildren to me. I believe that one of the premier reasons, and this is my belief, was my father's integrity in business dealings, which created a relationship between he and the peasants who were growing the flax, to a point where they simply could not refuse when we appeared in the middle of the night asking for shelter, asking for help, asking for food, asking, please help save our life. And I have to believe that, and I believe that very strongly. And hence, this has been a major important lesson that I have conveyed to my sons as well, and my grandchildren to some extent, that it is so important to act this way, to behave this way, like my father did with the peasants, because it turned out to be a life-saving thing. Little did he know, when he was transacting business, buying their flax, making sure that they would get the proper weight. And that's what I believe helped us to survive. My father's integrity and good name. It is said, Tov Shem Tov Mi Shemen Tov. It's better to have a good name than the most expensive of oils. And there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of truth.